Welcome to our panel, Geopolitics, the Geopolitics of the Digital Transformation. And I want to kick us off with 3 very brief statements. The first goes, my commission will be a geopolitical commission committed to sustainable policies. And that was our EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, earlier this year. The next quote reads, we must shape the rules that will govern the advance of technology and the norms of behavior in cyberspace, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, so that they are used to lift people up, not used to pin them down. We must stand up for democratic values that make it possible for us to accomplish any of this, pushing back against those who would monopolize and normalize this repression. This is a statement by US President Biden, also earlier this year. And the last statement goes, since entering the 21st century, global science and technology innovation has entered into an unprecedented period of intense activity. A new round of scientific and industrial revolution is reconstructing the global innovation map and reshaping the global economic structure. And that was Chinese President Xi Jinping. I think that sets perfectly the scene of what we want to discuss today. We are seeing huge technological changes around the world, which change how we work, how we live, how we communicate, how we inform each other, really very much how we are, our societies. And at the same time, there is a fierce competition about values, how to structure our societies, but also influence in the world. And that I want to discuss today with our insightful and very knowledgeable panelists, but also with our audience. Unfortunately, not so much in this room today, but very much online. So I'm looking forward to questions from the audience. And please send them in as soon as you have them. I would like to start with you, Madam Minister, if you could set us off by explaining us a little bit how the environment for technological change, but also the competition has changed during the COVID crisis, what that means for EU politics, but also tell us a little bit about Estonia, because Estonia is always referred to as one of the prime examples and showcases how to deal with hybrid threats.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for these introductory words, and I also would like to thank sincerely Körber-Stiftung for this opportunity to discuss this very relevant topic with all of you today. Digital transformation, which was not long ago considered largely as a technical topic, is increasingly becoming a strategic issue. And therefore, I think that this is very timely discussion, because technological development is directly related to our security, to our defense, to our economic security, competition, but also more and more to our democratic values, relations between other countries, relations between the United States, China, Europe, etc. It involves both risks and opportunities, and I'm sure that today we can elaborate on both of them. Unlike during the COVID war, open trade and communication routes, movement of people and capital is a critical issue for everyone. Europe's preference is a world of global cooperation. But as we can witness, the world does not always look as we would like to see. Global rivalry could lead also to the emergence of 2 competing models of globalization, which is based on the access to key technologies. And it is hard to imagine that in the long run, a predominantly authoritarian industrial world may outperform free post-industrial world in this. And I would elaborate first what Europe's opportunities are in these circumstances. First, we have to increase our technological capacity. The crisis has highlighted how digitally connected we are and how much inequality there is between countries with different level of digital development. And when I refer to crisis, I meant the COVID pandemic crisis, where we still are in, unfortunately. And Estonia, in cooperation with Germany, are leading Digital Impact Alliance, and together with Digital Impact Alliance and International Telecommunications Union, we are leading the project so-called GovStack. And GovStack, the idea of the GovStack is to diminish digital divide between countries. And I think that this is very important to help also increase resilience of all the countries in terms of digital development. Secondly, we witnessed that connectivity has become an integral part of geopolitics and sustainable growth and digital transformation, which also means that we need to invest in connectivity that we can trust. And here we believe that countries who are functioning based on democratic values should also think of investing to the critical infrastructure in terms of based of democratic values, so that we could have trustful, transparent investments either to physical infrastructure or online infrastructure. In this regard, we support also European trusted connectivity framework, and we believe that in Europe we move toward right direction in these terms. And here is also important to emphasize that when we have this trusted connectivity investments, we can also rely the infrastructure that it is based on democratic values, your human rights are protected, your privacy is protected, and these are the principles that we have to keep in mind when we speak about free, open, and secure internet. Third, we also advocate further development of the digital single market within the European Union. Estonia is a digital country, as it was emphasized also in the beginning, and now we think more and more about also having services that initially we had internally. We are thinking more about the cross-border digital services, and we very much hope that the European digital single market will soon have all the infrastructure in place to have also cross-border digital services. And when I speak about critical infrastructure, I speak also that about that all the countries shall have a digital ID for their citizens, which can be used for secure identification of people who are using these services, etc. So we very much hope that this will be one of the policies that other member states also support and will be implemented soon. And fourth, I would say Europe's security depends on the technological advances. Therefore, we support the development of the EU's digital foreign policy in cooperation with the European Commission and the European External Action Service to strengthen EU's position in the world. One of the goals of digital foreign policy could be to bring technology to the EU, which means strengthening cooperation between the member states, involving also the academy, private sector, and especially large corporations. So to sum it up, Europe has developed a holistic approach in this area, and we very much support it because it gives security and also economic and social benefits for the whole Union. A few words about Estonia as we speak about the COVID pandemic. Then I can only say that a high level of digital development has really helped to cope with COVID pandemic as well. For example, during the lockdown period, we didn't have to interrupt any of our public services because 99% of the public services provided by the government of Estonia are provided online. So it really increases the resilience of the country and the government if you are digitalized. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. We were just looking at each other when you said more than 90%, and that is very, very impressive. I don't think this is the case in my country, and
it's certainly not the
case in the US. So let me turn to you immediately, and maybe you can enlighten us a little bit about the current priorities of the Biden administration, what's happening in the US with regard to legislation, but also how the whole issue of geopolitics and the technological innovation is really perceived by and in the United States.
Sure. Thank you so much. And we do certainly have a lot to learn from Estonia. Prior to coming here, I had to spend 5 hours on hold with the US State Department. So we're really not digitized at all, so nor with our vaccination certificates. So hopefully some US policymakers are listening. I will begin with an overview of geopolitics and technology, and then I'm happy to answer questions in as much as where I think the Biden administration is going on some of the issues. So I'll begin by paraphrasing Clausewitz, who said, as many of you know, that war is an extension of politics by other means. In this case, technology is clearly an extension of geopolitics by other means. Geopolitics is the interplay of power and interests and influence over space and territory and people. Throughout history, technology has played a fundamental role in the practice of geopolitics as an enabler of land power, sea power, and economic power, which in turn is, of course, a source of power in its own right. And today is no different. The internet and its associated technologies are at the center of power and influence. But why does this matter? It matters because we're in the midst of a systemic competition, as the European called it in 2019. We thought with the end of the Cold War that this type of competition would go away, that geopolitics really didn't matter. After the Cold War, America found itself essentially a unipolar power. The view was that the United States did not face significant threats, no hostile alliances. We had a preponderance of military power, really unmatched. And there's a great document for the historians in the audience of 1993, the Pentagon's strategic guidance at the time really kind of captured this view. Related to this, there was the view that political and economic systems were converging toward liberal democracy, with the free movement of people, trade expanding, economic interdependence, all was moving toward liberal democracy. In Freedom House in 2000, that report spoke about political liberties increasing, the highest percentage of people were living free or partly free, as they said. And because of this convergence, we could depend more on international organizations, that they could mitigate geopolitical competition, or they had everyone's interests in mind and they could be used to solve similar problem sets or seek opportunities. In 2001, when China entered the World Trade Organization, President Clinton's remarks at the time were also quite interesting. He spoke about how it was not really about importing more products, but it was about importing economic freedom. President Clinton said, the more China liberalizes its economy, the more fully it will liberate the potential of its people. So there was a sense, again, that we were converging into similar types of political systems. Larry Diamond at the time, who's a political scientist, spoke of liberation technologies, that technologies would mobilize and transform and actually be a positive plus for democracy. About 2 decades later now, we actually face a different picture. Globalization did not go away with geopolitics, and technology and tech platforms continue to influence and shape political and economic systems. We're in the midst of what Klaus Schwab has called the fourth industrial revolution. And in the past, societies have been transformed fundamentally by previous industrial revolutions. China's president, Xi Jinping, has predicted that this fourth industrial revolution would bring earth-shattering changes. And he's right. That is happening today in all of our societies. With that view, China has been very good about planning how it would navigate this industrial revolution. It's set forth, as many of you in the audience know, its Made in China 2025 plan, identifying the key sectors, essentially, of competition in this revolution. Although I would argue that in 2016, we weren't quite looking at that in that way, in that competitive way, at least most, I think, foreign policy experts. But becoming a leader in AI and in quantum matters because, as I said, these technologies will shape the fundamental nature of our political and economic systems. In addition, they'll shape much more. Humanity, the nature of how humans interact. The new book by Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt and Dan Huttenlocher spoke about how AI will actually begin to change the way humans reason and think and learn because AI systems will be doing all of that for us. We're seeing how technology, data is often mentioned, but it's true. It's been called the new oil, essentially. It's a strategic resource. But we've even seen how in the past, technologies, even lesser technologies, solar panels, for instance, have become a point of geopolitical competition, too. So I think it's really important. Not everyone will agree with this frame, but agreeing with this frame and this reference as a starting point leads to a set of policies that will be different if you actually disagree with this frame. And what we're talking about today and this discussion we're having is how we grapple with these changes. What are the right institutions, policies, and approaches? So I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so very much for also contextualizing the issue and showing us how it actually also has changed a lot over the last 20 years and how perceptions have changed. And perceptions is the key word because, I mean, we are here in Europe. A lot of times our debates are very Eurocentric. I perceive the same also in the US. It's just nature that we very much look at ourselves and think ourselves. So it's really important that in this panel we bring in all perspectives and from all regions in the world. And this brings me to Dr. Jan. And thank you so much for joining us digitally today. There are very few things coming out of the pandemic which are good things, but that we can actually join each other virtually, I think, and also organize conferences like this in a virtual setting. I think that is a really good thing, and it brings us closer together. So what I would like to ask you, Dr. Jan, is give us or explain to us the perception from Asia, from Indo-Pacific. How is the issue of technological revolution and change in geopolitics perceived from your side?
Thank you very much, Moderator. Well, today, the digital technology makes it available for me to attend a meeting from Beijing rather than at the spot. And this shows the advantage or the positive sides of the digital technology. But if you concern the other sides, and then it's also very widely influenced on our life. And in China, and already, and many people spend more time in the cyberspace rather than in nature space. And what I mean is beside the sleeping time and the time with the eyes open, they spend most of the time online rather than to dealing with the offline life. And this is means, and the world has a heavily rely on the technology, digital technology, and the digital economy growing so fast is already it accounts for about 50% of the wealth or the GDP of some industrialized countries. And cybersecurity already becomes a major part of the national security. So the digital technology has changed our life a lot. Not only the daily life, but also change the geopolitical influence. Personally, I think that the geopolitical competition will become less and less important. I do not mean it becomes meaningless. I mean that it becomes less important than before because the cybersecurity and the digital economy and becomes more and more important. And they share the priority of government policy making. And from my understanding, and at this moment, the digital competition mainly happened between China and the US. And the US, especially the Biden administration, tried to develop digital cooperation with the traditional allies, and including Europeans, and to compete with China. And from my understanding, at this moment, China has not organized any digital club to deal with this kind of competition. China heavily relies on its own domestic market because China's absolute amount of the digital consumption is the largest in the world. So in that way, China's adopted the two circulation strategy. One of the circulation is internal circulation. This internal circulation try to develop a domestic supply chain, and mainly the digital technology or digital products. So from my understanding, in the future, China and the US competition will be heavily focused on the cyberspace, on the digital technology, rather than like that between US and the Soviet Union, heavily focused on the geopolitical competition in NATO space during the Cold War. So let me sum up my point. And China-US competition and will be different from US and the Soviet Union competition in terms of form and strategy. Second, and digital technology and very possibly make our life less real and becomes more very fictitious or illusionary. And for instance, and even this virtual conference between Chinese and American leaders, and they cannot they cannot get the information from the leader's assistant's face. This face actually their response to the other side's speech and will release a new real information. But for this virtual summit, you cannot get that kind of a new real atmosphere. You cannot get the real information. So the dangerous thing, there's many dangerous things listed by the new book, The Age of the AI by Kissinger and his colleagues. And actually, one of the dangers is that the world becomes less real than before. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. That was very enlightening, and I would like to pick up on this, because what I really want to come out with from this panel is understanding what geo-economic, geopolitical competition in the cyberspace really means. This is not a competition for territories. What is it really we are talking about? And I would like to ask you, Dr. Schadlow, again, how would you define geo-economic, geopolitical competition with regard to tech?
Well, I think it is in a sense still over territory and states in a way, because it affects how we are organized politically and economically. And as long as we are living in these states and not yet in the metaverse, and we might be at some point, and then that's a different subject of a different panel, we are competing over the organization and the use of data to organize societies, to provide or to restrict political freedoms, to surveil or not to surveil. And all of that has an impact on the nature of our democracies, on the nature of our political and economic systems. So I do think it might not be, as literal in terms of sea power and land power, as long as human beings are living within states and their lives are in a daily way are affected by data. It is, in a sense, still has that traditional component.
Has it also something to do with exporting our values and exerting influence in the world?
I would say yes, and I would say that the more we see digital societies developing, the more we see also openness in these societies, transparency, and it is in some sense also a fight against corruption, because the more transparent you are, the less opportunities for corruption to have in the society. And I would say that digital societies are connected, and it's difficult to line borders within the digital space. And therefore also Estonia raised cybersecurity at the United Nations Security Council to raise awareness globally about the importance of cybersecurity, and also to increase the understanding of all the countries around the world that we shall have the same international law within the cyberspace that we have in our physical world.
Dr. Jan, are you agreeing with those two very complementary and fitting definitions of geopolitical competition?
Well, first, I think I agree. Geopolitics is still there. Geopolitical competition is still there, but it's very different from that in the Cold War. And also, it's not that important as in Cold War. The reason is that the competition in the cyberspace becomes very important, and digital technology means digital superiority, and well decided, and who is the victor. So, from my understanding, and to have more influence in cyberspace, and at least is equal as the influence in nature space or the geopolitical concern. And the second is about these security issues. And from my understanding, and the transparency on the one hand, and help to improve the mutual understanding and the mutual trust. But meanwhile, and the transparency also seriously reduce the personal privacy. And personal privacy has squeezed and by the digital technology. So from my understanding, and if we cannot keep the balance, and no matter in the US or in China and in Europe or in the developing countries, and you will find that the government have a much stronger capability to use digital technology than ordinary people. So the government always have this kind of digital superiority over their people. So at this moment already, personal privacy already seriously undermined by digital technology.
All three of you touched upon many threats we are currently facing. You also talked about the benefits, obviously, but I want to dig a little deeper into the threats. Could you explain to us, or could you underline which are the most important threats we are jointly facing today? Madam Minister.
Threats, there are of course various of threats. The threats can be misuse of digital technologies for arbitrary surveillance, for example, which is of course totally unacceptable in democratic countries, and we definitely would not support it. Another issue is, I very much agree that the threat towards privacy is another threat, and it is very important. For example, in Estonia, our government is focusing at the moment how to use AI in our public services to make our public services more efficient. And privacy is one of the elements which we especially focus on, because we don't want to intervene into the privacy of citizens. And there are technologies, blockchain technologies, that would help to secure data exchange so that you don't intervene into the privacy. And of course, all these kind of activities have to be regulated by law. There is also a threat in cyberspace because of malicious behavior of states or other players in the cyberspace. Of course, we all have to deal with these threats. There is also threat of exchange of misleading information, where also have to step in and deal with it. So I think that there are many areas where our digital societies have to cooperate to raise resilience in coping with all these threats.
Would you like to add any threats to that already long list?
That was, I agree with everything the minister had said. Maybe I will just add both, to go more domestically, a sense of the numbing of the minds of these technologies. And it's really interesting, actually, how China and the CCP actually has recognized this, right? And is sort of very concerned about its young people and how much time is spent. And there's definitely a numbing of the minds in the United States with great variations in the way that young people are taught about how to use these technologies. And that was also linked to the fact that, you know, we're not going to have the millions of STEM people that we will need to stay competitive in this area as well. So that's a bit intertwined. Another specific sort of threat is the lack of resiliency of our critical infrastructure. And we are very, very vulnerable in the US. I'm not sure of the case exactly comparison in Europe, although it's probably similar, although in some ways your systems are, well, the more digital you are, in a sense, the more vulnerable you are.
That's true.
Yes.
And what worries me is we've been talking about this problem set for a solid 10 years, 20 years at least, and we're not able to make real significant progress on it. So,
Dr. Jan, I just heard you saying yes. You agree?
Yes, I like this. I like this comments or remarks. The more digital, we are more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. And the digital technology, not in terms of morality, digital technology is immoral. And it's a very, very anti-aged people. And in China, because the digital technology has already come into our life, and certainly now the thieves no longer steal your pocket because there's no cash. And everything people pay by the electric phone, by just use a smartphone to pay everything. But then you will find that for the aged people, they have a lot of troubles with this. And they don't know how to use the smartphone to order taxi and to do everything you need to use this smartphone. Even you get on the bus and you have to use a phone to pay for it. So you see, this kind of a digital service, and for the young people, from my understanding, it's a very welcome and very friendly because they learn this quickly, and they do not need anyone to teach them. But for aged people, it's really, really difficult. We call it the aged people unfriendly technology. So I mean that the digital technology only causes these immoral problems between states, and even internally, domestically, and the digital technology will face a serious and will challenge our traditional morality.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy that you brought in the issue of digital divides. Madam Minister, you talked about digital divides also between countries, but as we just heard, there's also in many countries a digital divide between societal groups, and I'm very glad that you brought that up because it's a huge part and component of resilience. Why I'm also always looking a little bit to that side is because I'm seeing that we get the first Q&A, the first Qs in, the first questions coming in. And with this, I would like to give the floor to Francesca Garetti for the first question. And as I heard, she will be visible to us. Yes, there she is. This is technology works. I'm so happy.
Thank you for your incredibly interesting comments and interventions. I have a question which is probably more directed to the Minister because it regards the European scene. And it starts from a comment that Dr. Jan just made, that the competition, the digital, and may I add, geopolitical to a certain extent competition is between the US and China. And then, of course, the US relies on a set of allies to improve its and its allies' position. So my question actually regards the European Union and a long-standing issue which now has moved to, of course, the digital scene, and is the fact that you have two different zones. One that is looking to boost the so-called European champions in order for them to be able to compete with other global champions, and that is the case also when it comes to, for example, the production of semiconductors. And the other side, and in particular I think this side is represented by Commissioner Vestager, is saying, sure, we need these sort of realities, but at the same time, we also need to be aware that the European economic basis is made by small and medium enterprises, and we cannot impair the competition between the competition within the European market. So my question is, yes, the European Union has now adopted a very holistic approach, as the Minister has said, but in terms of practical terms, we are still struggling with the same issues that we had 5 years ago between boosting competition with, again, sorry for the term, European champions, and improving internal competition between small and medium enterprises. And the other issue we are now struggling with, and probably we've begun to struggle particularly with this issue, is how much do we collaborate with the United States? And definitely the new Trade and Technology Council, TTC, is a platform where to talk about cooperation in the technology sector. But how much do we cooperate with them is still quite unclear, because of course there's the driver for autonomy. And this said, I have three main questions. One is, where do you see the European Union heading? Is it heading towards funding champions or towards improving internal competition? How this would place it globally, whatever choice it picks, which one would be best? And to the other two speakers, I would like to ask, where do they see the European Union at the moment within this competition, if so we can call it? Thank you.
Thank you so much for this bouquet on questions. I'm very happy that you asked about European champions, because I did not throw in a keyword for the discussion, and I want to do this now. That is the issue of sovereignty and digital sovereignty. But without any further ado, Madam Minister, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very interesting bouquet of questions. This was summed up by the moderator. There were really many different issues brought together. And thank you also for bringing in the EU and US Trade and Technology Council, which is one of the forums where we currently can have further a discussion on digital cooperation. And I would say that EU and the US are natural allies, as we are both, as we are all, we are functioning based on democratic values, and therefore it is very natural that we also cooperate more on digital area, and we see here transatlantic bond very important. When we speak about the digital sovereignty, it is about upholding European values of personal freedom and security, and it is for Europe, of course, important to raise resilience in this area. And at the same time, of course, we have to keep in mind that we would not over-regulate this area, because it would diminish the opportunities for innovation. But otherwise, I would say that definitely we have to cooperate more on this area within the European Union, and also help to have European champions in this area as well. But of course, I would like to also admit that the US is a strong leader in this area globally, of course, and cooperation is important.
Before I hand it over to you, Dr. Schadlow, there's one question from the audience, Madam Minister, which fits perfectly to what you just said, so I want to throw it in right here. And that is, will the European Chips Act be sufficient to bring Europe back as a major player, or is it just more talk than walk?
I would say that Europe has ambitions to be a player in this area.
All right. But we still have to do a little bit more.
Yeah, homework.
Yeah, some more homework. Over to you, Dr. Schadlow.
Well, I'm glad that Francesca asked the question because it also raised what we hadn't talked about until now really is the power of the Facebooks and the Googles as these extraterritorial, huge players in this domain. And so they're geopolitical players in and of themselves. And there is this, you know, as you said in the question, a fundamental tension between how they work, which is as network platforms that are built on the need to swallow, consume, and use as much data as possible, and keeping without borders, essentially, and sovereignty. I actually think the Europeans have done better than the U.S. in terms of thinking about digital privacy, right, in a fundamental way, much to the chagrin of these companies. But I think we have something to learn from you on that domain. So,
Dr. Jan.
Okay, I just have 2 points. And actually, the globalization, from my understanding, is already becomes a stop. And deglobalization is gaining momentum. And so we see the global supply chain has already broken. And so it's very difficult to see the global supply chain to be fixed in next 10 years, maybe next 20 years. So what I mean? It means that the major powers will compete for their own digital superiority over the other sides. So this is the first point. Second, and the European and have 3 choices. And first is to becomes a player of this competition, becomes a major competitor. And second, and they can take sides with either China or the US to cooperate with any of them. And there's a third approach, is that selectively cooperate with both of China and the United States, depends on the specific technology or the products. So if a situation like that, European cannot becomes a major player in the digital competition, and then they will make the policy according to 3 factors. First, security, and the second is about the price, and the price of these products or service and provided by China or the US. And third, I think is also very crucial, is the advantage of this technology. So, and I think it's very hard for Europeans to make this decision according to ideology only.
Thank you so much. And now the questions are really coming in fast. We talked about balance of powers a little bit earlier on, and one of the question asks, or one of the participants is asking, if a third bloc, a regulatory or value-based bloc comprised of the EU, African Union, India, and Latin America could become a balancing power or balancing bloc in the competition between the United States and China. Who would like to try to tackle this question?
You mean as separate and distinct from what the U.S. and the Europeans represent today?
Yes. Yes. I think that is what the questioner is asking about. Yeah.
I think certainly that could happen, but I think if you find, as you look at the specifics of the nature of the cooperation and the nature of privacy, of transparency, of protection of data, we'll find that that it will still generally conform to these two broad ways of sort of seeing the world. Maybe there's a third way that has some very technical differences, but ultimately I think the problem sets that new bloc will have to confront are many of the same ones that we're talking about this afternoon.
Mm. Would you like to add to this, Madam Minister?
It's difficult to add something. I also agree what was just said, and I think that it's this kind of blocks do not actually benefit anyone exactly. I think we need more cooperation, and And I'm glad that we have also different coalitions of like-minded countries, like Freedom Online Coalition, for example, where you have countries from different continents who share the same values and in terms of how we shall behave in the internet. And I think that this kind of coalitions help to avoid any new and further blocks also in this area.
All right. Would you like to add something, Dr. Jan, on the issue of global international coalitions to tackle the challenges?
Well, even China and the US are main players in terms of digital competition, and they are still trying to find something to cooperate with each other. The reason is that the digital technology and need a huge assumption, and they need a huge market to survive. Without the large enough consumption, they cannot get enough benefits to continue the technology invention. So in that way, I think China and the US will do some calculation. They definitely will decoupling from each other on some core technologies. But for those digital technology products or services are not that crucial, and mainly for commercial benefits, and they still can develop some cooperation. Just like very recently, and the U.S. representative and said that, and they will allow American companies to apply to reduce some customers on Chinese products, and actually previous set up by the Trump administration. So from my understanding, in the future, and the competition between the major powers is selective and rather than comprehensive.
Thank you so very much. Let us talk a little bit more about the big platforms and the big tech players. We just heard earlier that they themselves are geopolitical players in a sense, and obviously act across borders. One of the questions being asked is, what is the power of online gatekeepers, both in the global north, but also in the global south? And is the Digital Market Act a geopolitical instrument? Madam Minister, as it's a very European-focused question, at least the second part of it, would you like to start?
The Digital Act is related to the space of the European Union, and I think it is very important that as we would like to develop a digital single market, we must have the same understanding of this in all of our 27 member states. And as it underlines the principles which are based on democratic values, I would say that this is not related to any blocks, but this is related to the values. This is related to the Universal Act of Human Rights, which is also for everyone in the world. So I think that these are also the principles. For example, our internet shall be based on, and therefore I already brought in the Freedom Online Coalition, but I would definitely invite everyone to look into this coalition and the principles which it promotes, and I think that this is a beneficial tool, and this does not help to create any blocks in this era.
As time is running really short, I have to unfortunately bundle a few questions now. So one question goes to you, Dr. Schadlow. One of our participants is asking about the gap between Silicon Valley and Washington, and how that gap can be overcome to create more of a digital policy or a better policy making. There's also another question to you, Madam Minister, asking about Estonia as one of the leading examples in digital transformation in public services. And our participants, and me too, we would like to learn a little bit more, how did you do it? Why are you so advanced? And the last question goes to you, Dr. Jan, asking about China's strategy. to encourage everyday people to use technologies in their normal life? And how does China address with people limitation, both in knowledge and accessibility to technology? So building on what you earlier said with regard to the digital divide, how can we make that divide smaller? Dr. Schadlow, would you like to start?
Sure. I think there's actually less of a gap than is popularly thought. So years ago, there had been a famous incident of Google engineers being unwilling to work with the Department of Defense. And over time, I think we've seen a shift, and that's less and less of a problem. Much of Silicon Valley actually recognizes the problem of IP theft, of tech transfers. They don't want to be victims of it. And you see many successful companies working with the U.S. national security establishment. I think there is more of a gap between Wall Street and where the national security establishment is. And this is true even in the Biden administration, a sense that Wall Street is still funding many companies that are supporting the militaries of competitors, of China, of PLA, and there's a gap there, I would say, less so with the engineers. So it's sort of shifted. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking also at the clock, and it's really unfortunate to see that we have so a few minutes left, because the story which I would like to tell is much longer that I try to make a few highlights. First, I would like to say that, of course, my generation is very proud about my country today, but it started already 25 years ago when Estonia, after regaining its independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we wanted to be efficient and catch up with the Western economies. So we saw that internet is one of the useful tools for that. And in late 90s, we had a governmental program called Tiger Leap, which meant that we connected all the schools to the internet. And this was one of the big objectives, and it also paved the way for later generations, because they all became used to using internet and computers. In early 2000, or late 90s, we started to use electronic ID card, which was compulsory for our citizens. We also had a lot of public-private cooperation to implement these programs at that time. And in 2000, we had first our tax authorities implemented the first online tax application, so that you could fill in your taxes online. And it became very popular. And starting from that milestone, we added additional services to this, and also had in middle of 2000, I think it was 2004 or 6, we had first e-elections, so that people could use their electronic ID to fill in their votes. So, so building on these blocks, we have created this digital society where we are today. But all the countries who would like to become as digital as we, I also say that it takes some patience, and also it's very important to engage really all societal groups from different ages, etc. So we had different programs for this as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope that those who are negotiating the coalition agreement currently in our government are closely listening in to what you said, to take your advice, what we should do over the next coming 4 years. And last, over to you again, Dr. Jan.
Oh, thank you very much. And because the digital technology are very unfriendly to aged people, to uneducated people. So Chinese government has done two things. First, they issued a lot of regulations to protect those people and for their rights to use a traditional way to get the public service. For instance, and China forbidden any person and accept the cash. No matter what, you have to, and you accept the cash. Certainly, not every individual obey the law, and someone, if you humiliate those people, if they pay the cash, they say, okay, you don't pay, I do not, I give you a free service. And certainly this is not good, but then there's some law to provide, require all of the public services to continue the traditional way. And second, they set up some stations, not stations, I think they require all these public service to provide manned services. And they have the people there to help those people to operate their personal smartphone. If they don't know how to purchase tickets, to deposit money, and all of the things at bank and the station and all these public places and a railway station, they have people to help these people. And at the last, I want to say, actually, this is not only a problem in China. I think that there will be a global problem. And the aged people, less educated people, and can never catch up with the speed of the digital invention. They update this technology too fast, and they change all these programs so quickly, and the aged people and the less educated people can never catch up with that. And globally, or internationally, the digital technology is pacing up the polarization between the digitalized country and the less digitalized country. And so in the future, we will see, and the digitalized countries will become much richer and than the less digitalized countries, because the digital economy grows at 2.5 times quicker than the global economy. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I think we covered a very, very broad and wide ground. I think we would have enough to talk for another hour or so. Our time is almost up. I still have a few seconds left. And I would, yeah, this is the last moderator's question everybody hates. Over just 10 minutes from here, walking distance, the Chancellery is preparing the German G20 presidency. G7 presidency, not G20, G7 presidency. And my last question goes to all three of you. If you were to pick one priority in the area of digital issues, what would you place on the G7 agenda?
I would say that our countries have to ensure that digital societies can remain secure, open, and democratic.
Thank you very much. Dr. Schadlow.
I would just take that last part and say we need to ensure that digital societies can remain democratic.
Thank you very, very much. And Dr. Yan.
Well, I would suggest that to make the digital world as a model to ordinary people.
Thank you so very much. And this concludes our excellent panel. Thank you so much for this debate, for the wonderful, insightful comments and discussion. Also to our audience for the great questions. I was not able to integrate all of them. I hope for your understanding given the time. And also thank you to the organizers of the event. As always, it's an amazing conference every year. And that concludes our panel on geopolitics and digital transformation. Thank you so much and stay healthy. And I hope to see you soon again.
Thank you to the moderator.
Thank you.
Thank you.